Some people do not get openly angry when you pull away. Sometimes they get stranger. The real change starts when you stop reacting, because for people who live on control, what feels like success is often not love, not peace, not closeness. It is access. It is your attention. It is the power to affect your emotions whenever they want. And when that suddenly fades, their whole pattern starts to shake. Have you ever noticed how the energy changes the moment you stop explaining yourself, stop chasing closure, or stop answering every little provocation? It does not always become quiet. Sometimes it becomes confusing. Sometimes they go silent. Sometimes they push harder. Sometimes they come back acting normal, like nothing ever happened. That shift is not random. It happens when a pattern built on your emotional reaction stops working the way it used to. Many control-driven people are deeply dependent on validation, attention, and the need to shape how others see them. A lot of people call this supply. Not something physical, something emotional. It can come through praise, fear, arguments, guilt, or confusion. Positive attention works. Negative attention works too. What matters most is staying in the center of your emotional world. That is why these relationships can feel so draining. One person ends up reacting, explaining, proving, calming, fixing. The other person stays in a position of emotional power through criticism, confusion, or unpredictability. If this sounds familiar, stay with me, because the deeper truth is not just about what they do, it is about what changes when you stop feeding the pattern, and that is where your power starts returning. Over time, these dynamics become one-sided in a way that is hard to explain to anyone outside of it. You may start feeling like all of your energy goes into keeping the peace, avoiding the next blow-up, or making sure your words are understood the right way. But the problem is that in these situations, your words are often not being received in good faith. They are being examined, twisted, questioned, or saved for later use. The more you explain, the more material you hand over. The more detail you give, the more openings appear for argument, confusion, and distortion. That is why one of the strongest shifts you can make is to stop over-explaining. This does not mean becoming rude. It does not mean being cold. It means you stop acting like you are in a courtroom where you must prove your innocence every day. You say what is true. You keep it simple. You do not build a long defense for your own reality. In unhealthy patterns, explanations rarely create peace. They create more loops, more delays, more chances for your meaning to be pulled apart until you forget what you were even trying to say. Once you begin using short, clear responses, the whole structure starts changing. The old path of endless discussion is no longer open. The old cycle of reaction and defense loses speed. At first, this can feel uncomfortable, because you may be used to talking more just to avoid tension. But pay attention here. That habit was not always helping you. Often it was training you to hand over your peace in exchange for temporary calm. And temporary calm is not the same as respect. Watch what happens when you no longer offer unlimited explanations. The pressure often rises for a moment. Why? Because the old door just closed. Another major shift comes when you stop treating boundaries like suggestions. A real boundary is not just something you say once when you are tired. It is a limit that stays real, because your actions support it. That is the part many people miss. If a boundary keeps moving every time guilt, pressure, or emotional intensity shows up, then it does not function as a boundary for long. It becomes a wish. And in controlling dynamics, a moving boundary teaches the other person one powerful lesson. Keep pushing. Push harder. Wait longer. Change the tactic. Make them feel bad. Eventually, they will give in. That is how the pattern survives. But when your boundary becomes consistent, when it stays the same in a calm room and in a tense one, something changes fast. You are no longer negotiating your right to peace every time someone reacts badly to your limit. You are no longer trying to convince them that your line is fair. You are simply holding it. That is what makes it strong. The power is not in the speech, it is in the steadiness. And steadiness becomes deeply uncomfortable for anyone who benefited from your confusion. They may try guilt, they may use blame, they may minimize what happened, they may suddenly act hurt or misunderstood, but the point of the boundary is not to punish them. It is to protect you. It tells them what kind of access exists now and what kind no longer does. It reduces the fog, it removes the question marks. And when the pressure no longer changes your answer, repeated testing starts to lose its effect. Keep listening, because this is where many people first feel the pattern break. Not because the other person becomes better overnight, but because your part in the cycle becomes harder to control. Then there is emotional neutrality, and this one changes everything. Emotional neutrality does not mean you feel nothing. It does not mean you become numb, robotic, or disconnected. It means you stop letting your visible reactions become the steering wheel of the interaction. In high conflict situations, strong reactions become fuel. Anger feeds it. Panic feeds it. Long emotional messages feed it. Defensive speeches feed it. The conversation stops being about the real issue and turns into a storm about your reaction. That is where control grows. That is where the original problem gets buried. When you respond in a calm, brief, measured way, you interrupt the reward system. You stop giving the emotional payoff that keeps the conflict alive. This can look simple on the outside. A short answer, a calm tone, a refusal to rise to bait. But inside, it is a huge shift. You are choosing not to match chaos with chaos. You are no longer giving away your emotional center just because someone tries to shake it. And yes, when you do this, the other person may push harder for a while. That is common. When a pattern stops paying off, the first move is often escalation. More pressure, more bait, more dramatic behavior. But if it keeps getting no reward, it slowly loses power. This is one of the fastest ways to reduce emotional exhaustion too. Because you stop spending your energy on reactions you later regret. You begin to create a space between what happens and how you answer it. That space is where clarity lives. That space is where self-control grows. And if this is hitting home right now, pause and think for a second. Where are you still reacting from old habit instead of conscious choice? That question matters more than most people realize. A lot of people also reach a point where they have to change access itself. This is where no contact or low contact comes in. And despite how dramatic those phrases can sound online, the core idea is simple. You are restructuring access. You are reducing or removing the channels through which repeated chaos, manipulation, or emotional disruption can keep entering your life. In many painful dynamics, repeated contact keeps the system active. Every message restarts the same anxiety. Every call reopens old wounds. Every argument pulls you back into a familiar loop of confusion, defense, hope, disappointment, and emotional fatigue. Even negative contact can still act like connection if it keeps you mentally tied to the pattern. That is why less access can be so powerful. It lowers the frequency of the trigger. It gives your mind room to cool down. It helps you see more clearly because constant contact often distorts your perspective. When you are inside the storm every day, you cannot always tell how intense it really is. Distance helps, and when full separation is not possible, low contact can still work by making communication limited, practical, and structured. No long emotional debates, no endless explanations, no conversations that exist only to drag you back into the same emotional maze. Just what is necessary, nothing more. And yes, sometimes reduced access makes the other person push harder for re-entry. That does happen. But without the old level of reinforcement, those attempts often lose strength over time. This is not revenge. It is not a game. It is not silent punishment. It is protection. It is choosing psychological stability over repeated emotional injury. And once you feel what real space does for your nervous system, it becomes much harder to go back to constant exposure. Another key move is refusing blame reversal. This matters because one of the most exhausting patterns in difficult relationships is the way the focus gets flipped. Something harmful happens, a clear issue exists, but somehow, after enough talking, the spotlight moves off the original behavior and lands on you. Now the conversation is about your tone, your timing, your memory, your reaction, your facial expression, your supposed attitude. Before long, you are no longer discussing what happened. You are defending yourself against a new accusation that appeared in the middle of the conversation like smoke filling a room. That is blame reversal. And if you do not recognize it, you can waste years trying to solve the wrong problem. Refusing it does not mean you never admit mistakes. Of course, you should own what is yours. But it does mean you stop accepting inflated, distorted, or invented responsibility just because the conversation got turned around. It means you stay aware of the original issue. You do not chase every new accusation down a hallway with no end. You do not keep proving your intentions while the real behavior disappears from sight. This takes discipline, because the urge to explain yourself can be strong, especially if peace matters to you. But endless defense rarely creates peace. It usually creates more confusion. So you bring the focus back, calmly, clearly, maybe briefly, and when the other person keeps trying to change the subject, you notice that pattern instead of getting swallowed by it. This is huge, because every time you refuse the flip, you protect your sense of reality. You stop letting truth be rewritten in real time. You stop carrying responsibility that was never yours. And little by little, the emotional fog begins to lift. That shift alone can feel like waking up after a very long sleep. At the center of all of this is self-validation, and without it, every outside voice starts sounding louder than your own. Self-validation means you recognize and trust your own thoughts, emotions, and perceptions without needing constant approval from another person to make them real. In controlling or invalidating dynamics, that inner trust can slowly erode. You begin checking your feelings against their reaction. You begin checking your memory against their version. You begin asking yourself if you are too sensitive, too dramatic, too difficult, too much. Over time, this can make you deeply dependent on external confirmation, even when that confirmation comes from someone who keeps changing the story. That is why self-validation is not a luxury. It is stability. It is the quiet act of saying, I know what I felt, I know what I saw, I know how this affected me. I do not need instant agreement for my experience to count. That does not make you rigid. It does not mean you stop learning or listening. It simply means your reality no longer disappears every time someone challenges it. And when you stop outsourcing your truth, something powerful happens. You become less emotionally easy to shake. There is less urgency to win every discussion, less desperation to be understood by someone committed to misunderstanding you, less pressure to collect proof for your own pain. Your inner world starts grounding itself from the inside. That changes the way you move through conflict. It changes the way you recover from manipulation. It changes the way you make decisions. Because once your experience stops needing permission to exist, outside distortion loses a lot of its force. If you have ever felt like you were disappearing inside someone else's version of events, this part matters more than you think. This is not just healing. It is rebuilding your center from the ground up. Then comes predictable calmness under pressure, which may sound small but can completely change the emotional weather of an interaction. In unstable patterns, volatility becomes part of the system. One person flares up, the other reacts, the heat rises. Then both people get pulled deeper into the same exhausting cycle. Predictable calmness breaks that chain, and the word predictable matters. It means your response is not swinging all over the place based on what the other person throws at you. It means you are no longer easy to provoke into a scene. You are not handing over the map to your nervous system every time someone wants to create tension. This does not mean you never speak strongly. It means your strength is no longer chaotic. It is steady. It has shape. It has direction. That steadiness can feel unsettling to someone who is used to pulling strong reactions out of you, because unpredictability and emotional spikes often gave them a sense of influence. Once those spikes disappear, one of the main engines of the old pattern begins to fail. Calmness also gives you something priceless: time. Time between stimulus and response. Time to think before speaking. Time to notice the bait before biting it. Time to choose your next move instead of being thrown into it. And that time protects you from impulsive decisions that keep the cycle alive. The more you practice this, the less attractive the chaos becomes. You stop romanticizing emotional intensity. You stop confusing adrenaline with connection. You stop calling repeated destabilization passion just because it is loud. And here is the truth most people miss. Your calmness is not weakness. It is not surrender. It is self-command. It is what happens when your inner state is no longer available for easy control. That kind of calm can change the entire pattern without you saying very much at all. When you look at all these shifts together, the real power is not in beating someone at their own game. It is not about getting the perfect final line or making them suddenly admit everything. It is about changing how you participate in a system that kept you reactive, overexposed, and emotionally drained. Once you stop over-explaining, hold firm boundaries, stay emotionally steady, reduce access, refuse blame flips, trust your own experience, and remain calm under pressure, the whole shape of the relationship begins to change. What once depended on your reaction starts losing leverage. What once fed on confusion starts weakening when clarity becomes your normal state. What once kept you locked in emotional survival starts losing strength when you stop showing up the same way. That does not mean the other person immediately changes. Many times they do not. But your position inside the pattern changes first, and that is the beginning of everything. You're no longer standing in the same place. You are no longer endlessly proving, defending, decoding, and repairing. You are no longer abandoning your own peace just to keep the connection alive. And that matters because many unhealthy dynamics survive only when you stay overextended, when your energy is always available, when your self-doubt stays active, when your attention remains hooked. The moment those things start fading, the pattern becomes harder to maintain. So if you have been waiting for a sign that you are allowed to step back, simplify, and protect your peace, let this be it. Not everything has to be argued to the end. Not every feeling needs permission. Not every door has to remain open just because someone is knocking loudly enough. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is become unavailable to the cycle itself. And here is where the deeper truth becomes impossible to ignore. A lot of people spend years trying to figure out the other person. Why they do this, why they switch so fast, why they seem calm one day and extreme the next, why they return after long silence as if nothing happened, why they seem drawn to conflict and attention more than peace and honesty. But understanding every motive does not always set you free. Sometimes it keeps you mentally tied to the same loop. You keep studying the storm while standing in the rain. The more useful question is this: what keeps the cycle alive in real time? Usually it is access, reaction, uncertainty, emotional labor, and your hope that if you explain it well enough, this time the truth will finally land. But if the system was never built on honest understanding, then more explanation only gives it more room to continue. That is why changing your behavior matters more than decoding every hidden motive. You do not need every answer in order to stop participating in what harms you. You do not need a dramatic ending in order to move differently. You do not need the other person's agreement in order to see what the pattern has been doing to your life. And once you grasp that, your energy starts returning in pieces, your mind becomes less crowded, your body becomes less tense, your decisions become less desperate. This is the point many people feel scared because a calmer life can seem unfamiliar after too much emotional chaos. But unfamiliar does not mean wrong. It may just mean you are finally stepping out of survival mode. And if this is connecting with you, keep going, because the next level is not about managing their instability better. It is about refusing to organize your life around it anymore. The hardest part for many people is not seeing the pattern. It is staying committed to the shift after the pattern pushes back. Because when your responses change, the system often reacts. You may see more guilt, more pressure, more testing, more emotional performances, more sudden affection, more sudden silence. You may feel tempted to go back to the old script because it feels familiar. You may think, maybe one more explanation, maybe one more chance, maybe one more call will fix the tension. But that is often the exact moment the old loop tries to pull you back in. This is why consistency matters so much. Your new behavior has to last long enough to become real. Not perfect, just real. Long enough for your body to learn that peace does not have to be earned through overgiving. Long enough for your mind to stop expecting chaos as normal. Long enough for the other person's reactions to stop deciding your next move. This is not easy work. It asks you to tolerate discomfort without rushing to erase it. It asks you to survive someone else's disapproval without collapsing into self-doubt. It asks you to stand by your own limits even when you are misunderstood. But every time you hold that line, something inside you strengthens. Every time you choose clarity over over-explaining, space over overexposure, calm over reactivity, truth over blame reversal, you make it harder for the old dynamic to control your life. And no, this is not about becoming cold. It is about becoming clear. It is about becoming someone who no longer leaks energy into places that only grow stronger when you are emotionally exhausted. That kind of change may look quiet from the outside, but inside it is massive. It is the sound of your life turning back toward you. In the end, the goal is not to crush anyone, outsmart anyone, or spend your life proving that you were right. The goal is much deeper than that. The goal is to stop losing yourself inside dynamics that only work when you are constantly stretched past your limit. It is to stop abandoning your needs, your instincts, your peace, and your reality just to keep access to someone who only feels secure when you are off balance. Real healing begins when your focus stops being about controlling their behavior and starts becoming about protecting your own inner stability. That is where freedom starts. Not in a perfect final conversation, not in a dramatic victory, not in getting the last word. Freedom starts when your energy is no longer trapped in emotional survival. It starts when you stop making your worth dependent on being understood by someone who benefits from your confusion. It starts when calm becomes stronger than chaos, when boundaries become stronger than guilt, when self-trust becomes stronger than distortion. And once that shift takes hold, everything changes. You think more clearly, you recover faster, you notice red flags earlier, you stop confusing intensity with love, you stop calling endless repair work connection. You begin to build a life that does not require you to betray yourself in order to keep someone close. That is the real turning point, not changing them. Changing your role in what has been hurting you. If you can do that, the grip weakens, the fog lifts, the old patterns lose their control, and what comes back to you is something far more valuable than winning any argument. You get your attention back, your energy back, your reality back, and step by step, you get yourself back too.